All right, folks. So what we're building today is with Entity Framework Core, ASP.NET MVC. You know all the letters. But what's awesome about this project is that we finally get to move on to other types of relationships between our database tables. So far, we've really been working with one-to-one relationships. And we haven't really done any one-to-manys or many-to-manys. And of course, in modern databases, if you have a normalized database, you have these other kinds of relationships. They're foundational to normalized databases. And so what we're building today is a many-to-many relationship between students and courses. And so if we stop and think about what is, I guess first off, cardinality, these are just the different relationships. These are the kinds of relationships that are things that we're, saving data about in our database have between one another. Think about the word relational database. Of course, you have relationships between tables. That's the word relational. And so when we talk about kinds of relationships, just as a quick review, we have one-to-ones, we have many-to-manys, and we have one-to-many. Okay, and this is completely dependent on the software that you're building, and so I just want to point it out, like if you think about a customer and a purchase, what kind of relationship is between customer and purchase? Well, typically one customer can have many purchases, and that would make sense. But then you think about it the other way. Can a purchase have one customer, or can a purchase have many customers? And so that kind of depends. It depends on the software that you're building, right? Maybe on, for example, Amazon. Well, on Amazon, I don't think you can split a purchase. I think there's one customer per purchase. At least that's not a feature that I'm aware of. So, one purchase belongs to one customer. But maybe on Uber, I don't know if you guys are, splitting the fee on Uber, but you can split a fee. So one purchase can have many customers. So the point that I'm making here is that these cardinality rules, or these relationships, are really dependent on the software that you're building. They're not always going to be the exact same depending on the software. Now, again, back to the problem at hand, we have a many-to-many relationship. What are our things? What are our entities that we're building here? Well, you have students and you have courses. And what are the relationships? You just have to ask the question. What are the relationships between these two? Well, a single student, of course, can have many courses, right? So that's one student can have many courses, and a course can have many students, right? So when you have that kind of situation where you have one student with many courses and a course with many students, that's a really good example of a many-to-many relationship. There's a many on both sides, right? So that's what we're going to build today using Entity Framework. And so if I stop and think about this, and I have a database diagram, this is the diagram of the database tables that we're creating. And so when you are designing a database and you have a many-to-many relationship, right, on one place here we've got our courses, and you would say that a course has many students, and of course on the other side you say a student can have many courses, but you notice I've got this third table that I'm calling course student, right? So as part of the process when you're designing databases and you start designing these cardinality, kind of a cool word, right? Cardinality rules, what you do is you introduce a new table that's called, it's got a different, like a linking table. They might call this a linking table, or they might call it a join table. Okay, but in other words, this table, really what this is these are the enrolled students in every course, right? So maybe another name for this table would be like enrollment or enroll, you know? But basically this table in the middle shows you exactly what students are in what courses and what courses have what students. Okay, because it's not the case that every course has every student or every student is enrolled in every course, right? So it demands, right, many-to-many relationships kind of demand this, when you're designing this new table, to kind of say, okay, well, this entity belongs to this entity and back and forth, okay? So this is what we're creating. I just wanted to show kind of the database design. And then if I kind of Control Z here, when it comes to showing cardinality, there's different symbols that represent one. So like this is a symbol that represents where the one is, and this is a symbol that represents the many, right? Whereas of course here, the one and the many is on this side, right? So the key when you're using this diagramming symbols is one way of representing one-to-many relationships. So what you do is you break down the many-to-many. There's no many-to-manys here, and you create two one-to-manys. All right, so to kind of show off the software a little bit more, this is pretty straightforward, and that we could pick. We've only got 3 students. And we can just click edit enrolled courses, and we could say, okay, add a course or drop a course, right? Maybe Carson unenrolls in that course. And so if I go to that course, you no longer see Carson, right? But if I go put Carson back in that course, right, now Carson is enrolled in that course. So you can edit the students by changing the courses that they're enrolled in. Of course, you can enroll a new student as well. Let me click back. And here on the other side, here are our courses. And if I go to edit the course, we should be able to edit. And if I go to details, this is where you kind of see those students that are enrolled in the course. Okay, so a little bug there to work through. I'm not sure that some page wasn't found. Not a big deal. Basically, this is what we're creating, that many-to-many relationship using Entity Framework. And let's get into it. So I'll boot up Visual Studio and create a new project. ASP.NET Core Web App, and this is just going to be saved in my local source repos, and I'll just call this many-to-many EF for Entity Framework, right? We're going to have a full lecture on Entity Framework starting tomorrow. I just figured I'd start it out with a code demo today. And this is .NET version 8. We're not doing any authentication yet. And this is all fine. Defaults here are all good. Now, when it comes to Entity Framework, there's 2 popular approaches. One's called code first, one's called database first. And when you create your models, this is the C# model, obviously, and this is referred to as code first Entity Framework, right? We're creating our C# model, which will in turn create our database and our database tables, right? So not only, yes, this is Entity Framework, yes, this is many-to-many, but this is a specific kind of way of working with Entity Framework, which is called Entity Framework Code First. All that means is you create your models, and depending on how you create your models, it creates a database design. right? So that database design, that picture that I showed, that database will be created from these models that we create. So what are our models? Well, as we discussed, they're basically students and courses. So let's go ahead and create a class, and we'll get started here of a course. And what's relevant to our course? Well, a course has a title and it has a course ID. So let's kind of start this out. So now, when we lecture on this tomorrow, we're going to dive a little bit deeper. Obviously, you might have remembered me saying this from before. Maybe I didn't say it. I don't know. But the ID, this implies that this is a primary key. When I mark this as an integer, it is both. It is making it a identity column. So this is two things. This is a primary key and identity. Okay, so if we seed the ID, like 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll provide some seed data. It'll take an int for the seed. And so, yeah, primary keys are used in our relationships. And all my primary keys have always also been identity. It's really that identity property that enforces uniqueness. Okay, primary keys are used in relationships between tables, but identity is the constraint that says that this course will have unique course IDs. Okay, and this will be auto-incrementing as well. Our courses will have a title, which will be a string. And I'll just call it title get set. Now I'm going to mark it as required. Okay, which we have to bring in data annotation namespace. Now, marking this as required, if you paid close attention, what does that do in the database? Well, strings are nullable as a data type. Strings are nullable. Therefore, this column would allow nulls unless we mark it as required. Now that we mark this as required, title will no longer allow nulls in our database. So that's just a convention that exists in an entity framework. I am now going to have a list of data type student called students. Get set. It's pretty awesome that we can use collections like a list in C# to create our relationships, right? You would say that a course can have many students. I mean, how intuitive is that? If you ask me, this is pretty intuitive, right? A course can have many students. A student can have many courses. Now, remember navigation properties. Notice this is a kind of navigation property called a skip navigation property. The word skip kind of means, well, there's going to be that middle table, that join table, and you're going to have to kind of skip through that table to ultimately get to your students, right? It's not a direct, in other words, this course will not directly relate to students. You're going to have to skip through that middle table. Okay, and so that's why it's called a skip nav property. It's same concept, just whatever. It's got the word skip in front of it. The last thing I'm going to do here is in my constructor, I want to explicitly initialize my students. Students is a new list of students, and this will initialize the list. Full disclosure here, like there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. And so if I were to leave this off, this, I don't remember, might be kind of automatic and you might not have to explicitly type it. But basically when you create a new course, you're basically starting it off with a empty list of students is what this does. This might be automatic, but I like explicitly coding that because that makes sense to me. Now let's go ahead and generate our class called student on the other side. So we can kind of follow this, generate class student, and these are all private. I'm just looking here. You know, my course is a public course. I'm just gonna not do any of that. I'm just gonna right click here, add a class called student. And it's kind of the same thing on this side. We're going to do a public int student ID. Our students will have a name. Just because I was thinking about something, I didn't really do it in here. I made a financial aid status, like accepted or rejected, whatever. Not that that's an important piece of data, but that's what I went with. Now I'm going to make my list of courses. Again, this is called a skip nav property. And in my constructor, I will initialize the list. And so these models are pretty simple, but the fact that we now have a list of a type, a list of courses on one side, a list of students on the other. You can see the many-to-many. This is new for us in this class to be working with many-to-many. Again, I want to emphasize we have worked with one-to-one relationships so far. Going all the way back to chapter 4 in this book, we had one-to-ones, but we have not done many-to-manys, and we have not done one-to-manys. Okay, so the next thing to do is actually bring in Entity Framework. We bring in Entity Framework the same ways we've done all semester long. We're going to go to Tools, Package Manager, Manage Packages. Let's browse. I type in Microsoft Entity Framework Tools and SQL Server. So this first one, Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.Tools. We're going to install that. And get the green check mark. Clear it out. Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server. Now, as a reminder, we are working with localdb version of SQL Server, as we have been all semester. Get the green check mark. It's kind of buggy in this fact that now they're there. Okay, now they're under installed. You might have to refresh that, but that's none the same that we've been doing all semester. Now the next thing to do is to make a context, and so a context is going to help us make that connection between our models to the database, right? So we're going to make a new file inside of models. And I'm going to call this, because this is our Rankin context. And we're going to first inherit from DB context. And it's going to have to realize that this is inside of Entity Framework. So a using statement to bring in Entity Framework Core, so the data type of DB context is recognized. And this is a very standard, constructor that takes in some options and passes it up to base. This basically what we've been doing all semester. Now, these two properties that we're going to create are going to be for our tables. And so these properties create our DB tables. And so here is a property of students, right? Called students. So this will be our table name by convention, and courses. Now again, we don't have to create the linking table here, but I will show you how that is all done. The next thing that we do is we provide some seed data. And I will say that we're in the practice of providing seed data. Of course, you could always just not provide seed data, but it's nice to provide some seed data. You don't have to. Protected, override, void. On model creating is the method with a model builder. Now, model builder dot entity lowercase model builder, excuse me, model builder, there we go. So we're gonna provide some seed data for our students. Has data and semicolon. So these are where we're going to instantiate our students, and maybe financial aid status of I don't know, past, and I'll generate 4 students. So John, Jane, Doe. Go with my Bobby Gibson, and Chuck Norris. Get rid of my trailing comma. Now let's seed some courses. Now our courses here, these are basically the 4 courses that we take at Rankin, so we'll seed those courses. Now the syntax to actually enroll students in a course. Oh, by the way, do you think it's going to work with student ID of 1? No, we're going to have to give our students unique IDs. So make sure to change your student IDs to be unique. That would not have worked. So now we need to actually put some data in that third table. It's going to generate that linking table for us. And I'm sure there's, like everything, there's always many ways to do this. So let me show you how I did it. Model builder entity. Now, again, I'm kind of looking at the code that I wrote, and I'm seeing that, okay, we're kind of starting with the student. And we say, and here's, again, this is different. The student has many, and then you write a little link arrow. The student has many courses, and the courses, it's so weird. The students, the courses individually have with many, and you say the course has many with many students. So the student can have many courses, and each course can have many students. And then you say using entity, This is a lot by convention here. So notice my letter is S to represent my student. My C represents my course. So I've got S representing student. I got C representing course. So now you say SC, the student course, in other words, the student course, SC dot has data. And this is where your seed data goes for that middle table. And we're going to say new, and this has to be an anonymous object. So there's no data type because again they'll be doing that for us. You say courses, course ID, okay, is 1. So that is our web development fundamentals. And we're going to enroll John Doe in it. So then you say students, student ID equal to 1. So this enrolls our student ID of 1 and our course ID of 1. So let's enroll all 4 students in course ID of 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now this is all 4 of our students are enrolled in course ID of 1. And then let's enroll just our first 3 students in course ID of 2. So I'm going to paste this, change it to course ID of 2, and I'll say student 1, student 2, student 3. Okay, and this is just going to be what I use for my seed data. So I've got 4 students enrolled in this class. I've got 3 students enrolled in this class. I've got no students enrolled in the second year classes, and that's fine. And again, this will generate that linking table and seed it for us. Now, one thing as I was kind of rereading the chapter, one thing that you start having when you have these relationships, imagine now you have student ID 1 and he's enrolled in 2 courses. And you go to delete student ID of 1. Well, at that point, there's a decision to make because student ID of 1 is enrolled in some courses, right? So a traditional situation is you go to delete a student, but you get a database error. The database says, hey, you can't delete this student because he's enrolled in courses. Okay? However, in this system, right, in this entity framework system, there's something called a cascading delete. Okay? A cascading delete is enabled by default. And so by default, Code First Development configures a foreign key with cascading deletes if the foreign key is not nullable. So I guess there's the last thing there. If the foreign key is not nullable. And so maybe, so let's think about this. Are my foreign keys nullable? 1 second. Okay, and that is the case that I'm creating. I just went ahead and paused, and I'll show you on my completed project that this join table called course student has 2 columns and neither column allows nulls. Okay, so these columns are not nullable, therefore cascading deletes should be the default for us. So just throwing that out there. All right, now we're ready to create the database and create the connection string to the database. And so remember, we have our app settings.json. So let's open up app settings.json. I'm going to copy and paste a connection string in. Okay, again, I'm using localdb. And my database is called Rankin LMS, right? The learning management system, right? Rankin LMS. This is a standard connection string, so that we've put into our app settings. Okay, so now that we have defined our connection string, let's go ahead and close our app settings and open up Program CS to tell our app to use that connection string. So after the adding controllers with views, this is the name of our connection string, Rankin CS, that we just created. So create a connection string, tell your application to use that connection string. No interruption. So the next up is to create our migration. Now we will learn more about these migrations here in chapter 12, but as we've been doing all semester, we're going to add a migration at the package manager console. So under tools, package manager console, open up that package manager console. I'm going to add migration. I think the hyphen is, if I'm not mistaken, mandatory, but whatever. Initial. So initial migration or whatever you want to call it. Let's just call it initial. And let's see if we've made any mistakes. Pretty common to make a mistake at this point and find that mistake. Okay, so once you have a migration created, it's always worth looking at it before you actually update the database. So we're making a table called courses. We're making a table called students. Notice there's a third table called course student. And now, so we're creating 3 tables, which is what I would expect. And here's some insert data. We're inserting some data into our courses. We're inserting some data into our students. And we're inserting some data into our course students. Also is create index. And then there's, if you run this down method, notice it would actually drop the tables. So this migration is pretty much exactly what I would anticipate. And so what I'm going to do is update the database. And so the command for that, pretty easy, update -database, and that's just going to run all the migrations that were created inside of this migrations folder. Right now there's only one migration, so let's run it. Get it on the line, hit enter. And no errors. And let's go into now my SQL Server Object Explorer that you can find off of View, Object Explorer. And let's expand localdb. Let's expand databases. My Rankin LMS should have 3 tables. There's courses, there's students, there's my join table, course student. If I view data in each one, there's my students table, there's my courses table, and this is my enrollment table. So what students are enrolled in what course. Okay, awesome. So, in terms of like the new, just working with the database entity framework code, that's kind of the new stuff here. But of course, there's a lot more that goes on when you want to pull up a list of students and what courses they're in and, what are the queries against the database that you have to run. So I want to do the full example because there's more to it than just getting data in the database. We want to actually pull that out and make it semi-useful. And so, now we got to start bringing in controllers and views. And so let's just go ahead and start up with like maybe a student controller, right? So let's add a controller. This will be called our student controller. And we need to make our context, because we're going to be working with our database. So let's make a context that we initialize in our constructor, like so. And, you know, I was looking at some different code examples in this. Oh, by the way, let's bring in our models. Let's see. Wait, did I call it school context? What did I call it?
Rank.
Thank you. Rank and context. Okay. I noticed in some of the newer demos that they're like, hey, they're doing everything asynchronously. And we did that. We've done that before. So here we can write like an index method to get code synchronously or asynchronously. So I want to transition to writing more asynchronous code. So let's do that. Public async. And it returns a task of iActionResult. And I'm going to load up my courses in ViewBag. ViewBag courses is my context courses to list. Now I can await this. And maybe I can't. Context is not null here. Okay. Let's do this. Return view. See, I can return. Okay, let me. This is compiling on my other screen. Hold on. Context students. To list async. DB set students does not contain a definition to list.
We need to bring in Microsoft Entity Framework Core.
Aha. Says the voice from the sky. Thank you. Let's bring in that, and that fixes that. And I'm curious now. It still doesn't like that. It says list. Oh, to list async. Thank you. Instead of calling toList, we call toList async. Okay, so that should get our data from our database, just basically getting all of our courses and getting all of our students, and send that data accessible to the view. Let's then create that folder for student. So let's go here, views, right click, add a folder called student, and make an index view, right click, add a view called index CSHTML. And we sent in a list of students. So let's bring that into our strongly typed model, and maybe we do a title on this page. It says, I don't know, student. What is that page? It is the student courses something. I'll change the title. And then what I want to do, because I just like doing this, I'm going to open up my program CS. I'm going to change my default controller to the student controller. So that's my landing page. I just want to boot that up and get that title in the browser tab, just to make sure. So this says student courses, many-to-many EF. So this is my index view of my for my students. Okay, and we'll change these links to be actual links. I'm going to close Program CS now. And here's a little heading that says select students by course. So here's a little filter that I made. This will have a select tag in it that I will I'll kind of come back to this. I'm going to come back to this form. ASP action. It's called change course. My method is post, and I put an ID on this called course form. But what I want to do is I just want to get my students all put into the table, right? So put onto the page. So this is where I'm actually going to list out my students that were sent from my controller. Table, striped. And so my table has 3 columns: the name column, financial aid column, and a button column to enroll into a class. Now this is pretty close. For each student in my model, display their name, display their financial aid status, and I'm going to make a anchor tag to change enrollment in my student controller. Obviously that method does not exist yet. Going to look like a button. I'm going to send the ID into the method, and I'm going to make the button say edit enrolled classes for that student. So now I just want to test it out and see that it's pulling out the students out of my database and see what it looks like. They're all passed, so they're all enrolled. I got an extra quote hanging out here, but John, Jane, Bobby, and Chuck are all coming out of my database, displaying on the page. Let me get rid of that quote. And obviously we have to create this logic. We haven't coded that, and we have not coded this logic either. All right, so the next thing to do was I wanted a drop-down list where you could just select a course and see a student in those courses. And so this form, you could see it kind of points in that direction. It's like, hey, on the student controller, there's going to be a post that pulls the students of that course out of it. And then you're only going to see those students. I wrote a little bit of JavaScript to actually accomplish this. And so basically I'm going to pull a drop-down list here. It's going to have a little JavaScript, and when you post, it's going to hit this change course action. So here's the logic here. Div class form group. Didn't we talk about form groups being deprecated? Did I? Yeah, this is actually, I need to update that. So let's not worry about this class because this class isn't going to do anything for me. We'll have a label class of form label that will say select a course, and then a select tag this will have an ID of course select and a name of course ID. And you'll see I'm going to point out where we're using these. This course select we're going to use in the JavaScript. I think the name I use in the method change course. So I think we send the data over to change course from here. So here's our first option. The value is empty. We'll say select course. Razor for each course and view bag dot courses. Okay, if view bag selected course is not null and view bag you can see here the difference between this if else is one will have a selected and the other one doesn't. The value is what the JavaScript will use, but the title is what the user will see. So they see the title, but when they select it, we're going to programmatically work with the course ID. Okay, so this is actually kind of cool. So what we're doing here is we're using JavaScript to submit the form. So we're not waiting for the user to submit the form. Basically, as soon as they change the element, it will cause a change event in JavaScript and fire a form submit. So here's a little bit of custom JavaScript to do this. You guys will recognize this. This is back in the, when we're learning vanilla JavaScript and scripting the DOM. We're gonna get a element, get an element by ID, the course select, which of course this is our select list, right? So we're selecting the element here into the JavaScript world. This is our select tag. Add the event listener for change event. So we're going to say select element, add event listener. For the change event, here's an anonymous function. Then we get the form, and we submit the form. Okay, pretty simple JavaScript. Get the select list, add an event listener to it. Get the form, submit the form when they change the select list.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So lately, the codes have been wanting us to do instead of the for each for the options, they've been wanting us to use like ASP items, new select list, and everything. Are there times when, like in this case, it's better to use the for each as opposed to using a new select list?
Yeah, I remember this. There was a, and I even remember we like graded that in the lab. I think what's nice about the other syntax is you don't need this if-else option in there. That other syntax is a more condensed way of doing the same thing. And so it's really a preference at that point. They both achieve the same result. One syntax, I would say, is more condensed than the other. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so basically there's not going to be like oh, you didn't do this, so you'll lose points if we decide to use, unless it's explicitly stated to
Unless
use
it's
the
explicitly
ASP stuff.
stated. Yeah, again, it was just, I think that one time was like, hey, here's a new syntax, demonstrate that you know how to do it, you know.
Okay, just wanted to be sure.
But in general, no. I would say just get the functionality going. Okay, so here's where we are. We are now at the point where when the user selects, when they make a change on the dropdown, it'll fire this action, except for we haven't created this action. So let's go into our student controller and make a change course event. So student controller, and we're writing a sync task iAction result called change course. We're going to accept a course ID in as an argument. Now, we just had a chapter on model binding. Notice this course ID kind of comes from where? This comes from course ID. From this name attribute, we're sending in the course ID from this name. Whatever the value is, whatever the value that's selected is going to be sent into this method because of this name attribute on my select, right? So that's how you get the course ID into this method. And so I'm going to have a list of student called students in course. We'll load up our view bag courses just the same. Set my selected course that we kind of programmed against on the view side. Say if course ID is not equal to 0. In other words, we have a course ID. Students in course Now, I will note that we are going to hit link as a language or as a tool in more detail in our course. But if you stop and take a look at this line of code, if the course ID is not 0, then hit the database and find where the student, so all your students, where each student is analyzed to see if that student has any courses with that course ID, right? And here's what's really nice about line 29. Okay, line 29 is really nice because if you remember writing joins in SQL, okay, you had to traverse all these different tables and match up all these IDs. Joins can be complicated and difficult to write. And so this link statement, you know, notice we're not even writing anything about that join table. We're just saying, hey, where any student has this course ID, that will write the joins for us. The underlying SQL with those more complicated joins is really simplified here. And so that's an advantage of working with link, is it can kind of simplify things. But if the course ID is 0, we're going to set students in course equal to all students, right? If it's not 0, get that. Otherwise, get all students. And return to the view, return to the index view with my students and courses. And we learned about all the different ways to send data, you know, all the different constructors. And okay, so I think that should be at a working state. Yes, Atticus.
On line 24, would you want the course to be total? Or you do them all?
That might be possible. Let's see. So let's just, yeah, good eye. So that it might actually be exactly right. Course is. And so that's exactly what broke us there. Thank you. And so if I look at this class, notice it only has 3 of my 4 students. Go back to that class, we got all 4. We go to this class, we've got none. This class, we've got none. Select a course is also not 0, so it's giving us all our students. So kind of a neat little bit of JavaScript written there, vanilla JavaScript to submit forms, as well as just normal stuff. And again, link is awesome because it really simplifies the queries against the database that you have to write. And we will dive into more link in another time. All right, it can work on a lot of different things. At this point, what I want to work on is just the ability to add a new student, right? So we've got the read operation kind of going with some filtering out of the database, but we're just gonna, create some logic to add a new student. And so we want to look at, doing some different operations besides reading. So here I'm going to make a link. And I'll just call this enroll new student. So this is on the student controller. We need to make a method called enroll new student. So let's copy that name. Go back to my controller, and I'm going to start minimizing these different methods. And public async task, enroll new student. Now I'm just going to mark this as a get because we are going to also have a post. Let's get our courses out of the database and go to the view. So here is the get method. And so I need to create that view because there should be a view by default called enroll new student that's not there. So let's add a view, paste that name in again to be a CSHTML. And this is a student that we are going to create.
Did you make that in the student folder under view?
That is correct. This view is under the student folder called enroll new student. This will be the post method. So we ask for a student name, and then we put a little for each loop again to loop through our courses and put a checkbox for each course. Again, to kind of highlight, the ID is the course ID, and the name of the checkbox is enrolled courses. Well, therefore, all of my checkboxes will have the same name. Therefore, that doesn't really offer, I don't know if that offers anything for us. I was thinking of radio buttons. No, these are checkboxes. And then the value in the label, though, you see the course title in the label.
Does the div with the form check class need to be around the for each?
I put the student ID as a hidden field. Just so that student ID, it should be an ID of 0, right? So when you're creating something new, it should be a student ID of 0 in case we want to use that in the controller. And what was your question?
The form check div, does that need to be around the for each?
Each checkbox has its own, and that'll just put each checkbox on its own line.
Okay.
That div will break it off on its own line. And of course, the submit button. And so this isn't going to work yet because we have to write our method to post, but just to glance at that page, and here, this is what it looks like. We can type and check boxes. Okay, I'm remembering why this name. Okay, what do we have here? Well, again, going back to the model binding chapter, if you have a bunch of controls with the same name, they will be passed in to your action method as an array. So let's go back to our controller and see how that works. So I'm going to go back to my controller. I'm going to write my post. And public async task I action result enroll, and I've been keeping it like this. Now when you post, of course you're going to have a student that comes in that will be your new student, but I also brought in a string array for the boxes that are checked called enrolled courses. And it's because of this, as I highlight this name on that view, that those checkboxes will come in as an array of strings that we can use to do what we need to do over here. All right, here's the logic that I actually have to flush out real quick. So we have a student coming in. We have enrolled courses, which are strings, strings of the courses to put them in. And so here's what I'll do. If enrolled courses is not null, we loop through our enrolled courses and say course C equals underscore context courses find. So we basically hit the database, find the course by the ID, and then we add s.courses.add that course. And then we save changes to the database. So context students add that student and save changes. Await context save changes async. And then let's load up our list of students. All students called students. And we're going to send our list of students into the index. So inside of our string array, find that course, add it to the list of courses on that student. I'm going to put a breakpoint in right there and just troubleshoot that real quick because I left this logic off. But again, if you can change the enrollment, it should be easier to add a new enrollment. So enroll new student. Bob Miller is going to be in just one class. Enroll new student. And so that's good. That's good. That's good. Add the student. Save the changes. Redirect. Okay. So notice the error. You cannot insert null into financial aid status. That's an easy fix. We just need to have a text box for financial aid status. And that is on enroll new student. why I made that required. I think it was just doing a demonstration, but let's add input all right, what I kind of forget, this should be Boolean anyways or something. I'm not sure the different string values that you could seed, so it doesn't make a big difference, I guess, is the point. So far I've had the word passed, so I will put the value of passed, or how about failed. So we got a couple string values for our financial aid status of, or how about accepted or denied. How about that? Passed or failed. And so hit that breakpoint again. Enroll new student. Accepted. Bob Miller in the 3rd class. Enroll new student. Let's just hit continue and see if. Okay, so now this is back. Okay, I forgot to load up my view bag courses, right? So I'm going back to the student controller index, but I forgot my courses in my view bag. So this method back here on my student controller also needs view bag courses. Okay, now if I'm going to boot this up outside. Bobby Miller should still be added, or whatever his name was. There we go, Bobby Miller. I don't have that logic built in yet, but we have added a new course, and just to enroll another student, we will add Tony Miller. And now Tony Miller's added without error. We're doing good. Alrighty, next up is to get that, we can enroll a new student. That's cool. Let's remove our breakpoint there. And minimize these methods. Next up would be to change the enrollment. And so we have a button that calls, let's close the context. We have a button somewhere. That's new student. That's my home page. I closed it. So if I go back to, if I go back to the index, okay. And here's our button. For each student, there's a button to change enrollment, and we're passing the student ID in the route, right? Because that's kind of the default, is that there is that route in our program CS that takes an ID. So student index. So we will pass that ID along into our method called change enrollment. So student controller, and let's write an asynchronous method, public async task action result called change enrollment. And again, model binding says, take the ID from the route and pass that in as a parameter. So using that out of the box functionality is nice. And let's hit our database to read a student by its ID asynchronously. Now on change enrollment, we just gotta, all we have to do is get our student and load up our courses, view bag dot courses. So get our student, get our courses, and send that student to the view. And this is going to be our get. All right, why don't we go ahead and put that view together called change enrollment. So under the student folder, we're going to have a copy this method name, add a view, and paste. By the way, it's kind of a neat little thing. Again, the more you do it, the more you know. Maybe I should have known this already. Once that view is created and you're on the controller, right click, go to view, and it'll snap you right there if it's wired up properly. And I don't know how I've overlooked that until now, but that is that. So let's make our form. This is a model student. Change enrollment for your student's name. What casing is this? We got Pascal casing, we've got kebab casing, we've got camel casing, typo casing. So we have to make this post for each This took me a little bit to figure out, so I'm going to copy and paste this, and then I'll just explain it. Because I needed to figure out how to look at the courses that a student was enrolled in and have them preloaded as checked, right? And so you can, obviously we're looping through our courses, and here I wrote a little razor bool is checked and wrote a query to see if in my student model, if that student has any courses where the course ID equals that individual course ID. So it's a little link query to see if that student's course ID matches the course ID in that iteration of the loop.
I have another question.
What's
Why do we do the I guess you said razor to have the bool inside as opposed to just having the bool? Well, I guess it doesn't work if you don't have the razor thing.
Yeah, it's just
surrounding
a
it.
little C# logic has to be in the razor block.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I was
So
just
then,
curious.
here's a little logic, right? It's going to be true or false depending if that query, what that query returns. Okay, input type of checkbox. So we got a checkbox here, and basically here's our logic. If checked is true, then we add the checked it used to have to be where it says checked equals checked property, but if you just have the string checked, then it's a Boolean true or false, and that is checked equals true. So it used to be, whether it was checked equals true or checked equals checked. Now you could just say checked. So here is a little ternary, right? This is a ternary, this question. If is checked is true, then it'll say checked. If is checked is false, it'll just be an empty string. And then we have a label with the course title on it. Okay, so now, again, we're not posting anything yet, but I think it's at a testing point to see if you can edit a student and get the checkboxes checked that they're enrolled in, right? So like our new student should have just one course, like Bobby Miller, right? We just had one course, and there you could see that's preloaded with him. If I go back, and Jane Doe should be in 2 courses. So this looks like it's working well for us. This Chuck Norris was just in 1 class. So it's at a good point there that's working. And I want to point out again, I'm using that model binding with this name called enrolled courses. That'll send in that string array into the post. Which you could add that method of posts. Awesome. So let's go ahead and write this post for modifying student enrolled courses. Back to my student controller. Here's my HTTP post. And we're going to accept a student and a string array of enrolled courses. Whoa. Maybe that's exactly what I need it to be. Maybe it's not even close. Okay, student, context, awaiting my context. Students. Okay, that should be fine. Clear out the student courses, right? So regardless of what they were enrolled in, clear it out. Loop through the enrolled courses, add them in, save the changes, load up all the students, load up ViewBag, and return, that it should work. Before you guys type it all out though, I will test it. And
Going to need a button.
Add, oh yeah, I gotta have a submit button, huh? Let's go back to the change enrollment. The other thing is we need to hide that student ID. So there's my hidden student ID and a submit button to save changes. So we're going to put you in that class and troubleshoot this problem. 1 second. So student controller, post. That went too fast anyways. There was a little thing I tried differently here. So I got the working code. I was just trying something different. Bob Miller, I want to go into that class. So there's 2. And there's my student ID of 6. So if I hop over that, let's see if my student is found. My student So, got to troubleshoot this one line, line 76. That is the one line I tried writing something different. But clearly, I selected this Bobby Miller guy, and if you look at here, it's got John Doe. So it changed the enrollment for John Doe. So that's not what we want. So let me go back and write the line, await context. Let me write this the way I had it. Except for this is an await, so this is probably first or default async, and that is how I had it. So hopefully this this link should be at least hitting the right, getting back the right student, and including that student courses. I'm going to point that out. I'm going to hit this line a little bit more. So Bob Miller, save changes. Hop over that. This should now be Bob Miller, I hope. And now we got Bob Miller. It was just a bad link query. So we fixed it now. So find the student where the student ID equals the student ID and include that student's courses. First or default async. So we've written this link query before with that include. Now leave that include off and things don't work. So when you have multiple tables, you have to include their relationships. And so one more time, I should now see if I go back to Bob Miller and click Save Changes, now those changes are persisting. So if I go back, right now the back button doesn't work, and that's a notable feature. It's not a bug, it's a feature. But I think John Doe got edited somewhere along the way on accident. There we go. So now John Doe's got the right classes I want on him. Okay, we are at a working point right now. Let's get you guys caught up. Okay, so that's a lot of the heavy lifting on our students. The only operation left on CRUD, we've got edit, where we're changing enrollment. Of course, you can make this your own, where you could edit their name or edit their status. That's customizable. But at this point, our update, we're just changing their enrollment. We've done create, we've done read, and we've got filtering on the read. The only thing left is delete. So let's do that. Let's do an HTTP GET. And if we just bring in the suggested, pass in the ID. Now this is a GET, so this doesn't even make sense. So let's return to a view. We're just going to send that student into the view. This makes sense, right? So I'm going to make a view called delete student. Add a view, call it delete student, make the model student, real simple. H1, are you sure you want to delete at model.name with a method to post. We'll store the for the model student ID in the value. Do you guys wire these up to the ASP4 or to the value? I think it could work either way. Trying to remember if I had my hidden field as an ASP4. It is ASP4?
Oh, it usually is.
Yeah. That way we're passing that in. Delete student.
Another quick question.
Yeah.
Why do we still do like method post and HTTP post when when apparently there's an HTTP delete and a method delete?
Oh, are you talking about like, if I go back to my student controller, look, I'm not sure. I have to see exactly what you're talking about. But you're right. We can write our own APIs, and so there are delete methods that you can wire up, very similar to what we did in the JavaScript class. And that's if you're just making an API versus making the full MVC application that we're doing.
So could you use C# like Express?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can make a web API
So
just like we did. Yeah.
so we could link React to C#.
Yeah. Yeah, they play friendly. So, okay, delete student. We accept the student in. Now, remove S. So when we post, our student should come in, remove the student, save the changes, and load up our students, load up our courses, and return to the view. I'm going to put a breakpoint in here just because I don't trust it. It wrote the code for me, but let's try it out. Oh, I need a button to delete, don't I? Let's go to the index and let's add another column. On my table, so here's enroll in class, and then this will just say delete. And another TD to send in the student ID via the route ID. So again, if I go back to the controller, it should take in the ID into my delete student. Sorry for pinging all around, but yeah, that should work. And when I click this button, this is a button danger. Now let's throw in a breakpoint. Now that we can click a button to delete a student. Make sure that that's all good. And I'm going to delete Tony Miller. And I should hit a breakpoint. So student S is student ID of 7. So this is not going to work because I only have a student ID that I sent in. So either I can write link to query that student, or I gotta get it to actually send the whole student object. For whatever reason, it did not do that. Hang tight. So I will write the link query. I could go a couple directions here. I will write the link query to find the student by its ID and include the courses. It's going to be very similar to this. So I'll change that to an int ID. Double equals ID. So I had to pass in just the ID, word equals ID, and then this becomes student S. Okay, let me refactor again. Let me bring it back to student S. Let me paste in that query. Almost there. That looks good. Put in a breakpoint. I wish it passed in my whole student, but since it doesn't, I'll just hit the database again. Tony, delete student, hop over, and student is now Tony, and continue. Yep, okay. Pause, let me troubleshoot, I'll fix it. Yeah, it was funny because we were talking about, is that ASP4 or should it be value? So let's change that just to student ID. Thank you, Jack, for pointing that out. And let's try that. Hop over, continue. Oh, I still got to remove my query. So now the student should be passed in, so I don't have to query it again. And now I should be able to remove S. Stop. Comment that line out and just remove S. Hopefully. No. So this is one of those I didn't exactly even know what I changed, but I'm just going to walk through the working state that it's currently in, and apologies for the choppiness, but we get the student ID brought into student S, and so then I hit a link query to pull that student out. And one change I did make is I removed student here on line 103. So I created this variable on 101, remove student. I might have at one point been removing student S instead of student. And so that might have been my problem the whole time. Nonetheless, here's my delete student where I'm getting the student ID in here, using that ID here, removing said student here, and in a working state. So I can now go back to, for example, Bob Miller, delete the student, and Bob is gone. And so that is CRUD on students by course. Now the next thing to do, of course, is the other side, and that will be where I head next. The other side, the other table, I should say, and actually working with the courses. Instead of working it from the student controller, we'll be working with courses. Okay, well, we're back from a little bit of a break and students were dismissed, so it's just me now. And so I'll talk through creating CRUD on the other entity, which is our courses. And so I think this is going to go a lot faster, and so we're going to use some different tools here that we didn't use last time. So we already have our model, so I'll start with the course controller. And this, we're going to use some scaffolding, and we'll make some changes as needed. So we're going to choose MVC controller with views using entity framework. So this is going to automate some of the work, not all of it. And we'll be able to select the course class and our DB context. And all the rest of that is default, so we'll click add. And so this is called scaffolding, as you can see, and so it's kind of generating a lot of templated code to kind of start from. Pretty impressive what this can do out of the box. So we'll start with this and then customize it for our needs. Okay, the first thing that I see now that this code has been scaffolded or created for us is that my convention is a little different. This is courses controller, so maybe I should have renamed it, but nonetheless I know what it is So if I hit /courses, you find full CRUD operations. You know, we can create a new course, cool course, and get that generated. We can edit the course, cool development course. So this is reading, that's editing. We can delete, create, read, check, update, check, and delete, right? If I click on edit, you know, we're not really doing a whole lot with the students here. And so you can begin to bring that in. If, for example, on the details, maybe I want to see who is enrolled in that course. And so if we look at that, here's my details. Here's my course. And what I would do is I would change that query on my details to look something like, and it's very similar, but to look something like this. We're going to hit the course and include the students. So now on my details view, I should be able to extract those students into the view. And so let's open up the details view. Again, I can just right click, go to view, and probably have a for each loop. Right, so here's my course name and all the titles, and I'll throw in a little markup here underneath that are my students enrolled in that course with the student ID, student name, and you can begin to work with the students here. Now, you know, if you want to edit the students or edit the students who are enrolled, you have that functionality in the other area of the site. So now, at a minimum, I should be able to hit the details and see the students who are enrolled. And, well, it's already refreshed. If I kind of go back, I can see the students enrolled in these courses. And no one's enrolled in that fourth course. And so, yeah, so we have CRUD on both sides of the many-to-many relationship. Literally the only thing and the last thing to do is maybe change these links in our layout. So I would go under Views, Shared, Layout, and I'm looking at my nav bar. This would be the student controller. These were courses controller index. So this link will say courses, and this will say students. So there's our students and there's our courses. Awesome. Many-to-many CRUD operations on both sides. You know, a couple mistakes along the way, but we fixed them and all is good. Hope you guys enjoyed.